a decorated Black War veteran, once hailed as a national hero, now sits handcuffed in a local jail, denied a simple phone call. The judge stares coldly, dismissing the request with barely a glance. What happens next shocks the courtroom. 5 minutes later, the Pentagon intervenes. But why now? What secret does this veteran carry that forces the highest military authority to act? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The air was thick with the scent of jet fuel and distant salt water when Isaiah Trenton stepped off the transport plane. His boots hit American soil for the first time in 8 years. But there was no welcome banner, no salutes, no family reunion, just the silence of a near-empty tarmac in Norfolk, Virginia. He adjusted the duffel bag slung across his back, one arm stiff from an old injury he'd never reported. His uniform, stripped of medals he'd earned but never officially recognized, flapped in the wind like a forgotten flag. Isaiah was 34, black, built like a tower and quiet as a ghost, the kind of man who could blend into any environment when he chose to, even when his very presence unsettled people. In the Marines, they called him Shadowline, the last face the enemy saw before lights went out. But here, back in America, he was no warrior, no hero, just another black man in a country that had always been conflicted about the value of his skin. He carried more than just scars from the battlefield. There were classified memories, operations in hostile territories that didn't officially exist, missions where he'd saved civilians, defied orders, and watched brothers in arms die while superiors wrote sanitized versions of their deaths in polished government reports. He returned home with nightmares stitched into his brain, and a silence forced upon him by non-disclosure agreements he never consented, only obeyed. PTSD wasn't an acronym to him, it was a living shadow, trailing him in silence, waking him at 3 a.m. with the weight of screams that never made it to headlines. He rented a small apartment in Richmond, not far from where he grew up. The neighborhood had changed, more surveillance cameras now, more fences, fewer kids on bikes. On his first day back, Isaiah went to a local VA office to inquire about benefits. The receptionist, a white woman in her 50s, barely glanced up before motioning to the end of a long line. Hours later, a clerk told him his file was incomplete. His service apparently couldn't be verified. That night, he stared at his reflection in a cracked bathroom mirror. His uniform hung on the back of the door like a costume from a life he was no longer allowed to claim. America had used his body, his mind, his silence, and now it seemed eager to forget he'd ever served at all. He applied for work, dozens of places. Warehouses, security firms, postal routes. At interviews, his military service was met with cautious curiosity, then a quiet withdrawal. "You seem a little intense," one manager said. "We're looking for someone who's team-oriented." Another employer asked if he'd ever snapped under pressure. A third simply said, "We already filled the position," before Isaiah had even sat down. He knew what they saw, a black man with military discipline and eyes that had seen too much. To them, that translated to danger, risk, unpredictability. Not one of them asked what he'd done overseas. Not one of them cared that he'd earned 4 commendations, all redacted from his discharge file due to national security protocol. By the 3rd month, Isaiah's savings were nearly gone. The rent was late. The electricity flickered, and food became a calculation. At night, he'd walk for miles just to keep his thoughts from caving in. During one of these walks, he passed a young white couple. The woman clutched her purse and crossed the street. Her partner followed without a word. Isaiah didn't flinch. He'd seen this choreography before. In his own country, wearing no uniform, he was a threat, invisible until feared. The next morning, he stood in line at a local grocery store, with a bag of rice, a can of beans, and a discounted loaf of bread. A boy in front of him, no older than 10, stared curiously at the faded tattoo on Isaiah's forearm. "Semper Fi." The boy smiled. Isaiah returned the gesture, softly. The mother noticed, pulled the child closer, and whispered something in his ear. The boy's smile vanished. The shame wasn't new, but it was heavier now. This wasn't just rejection, it was betrayal. Isaiah hadn't expected parades or medals, but he hadn't expected to feel like a ghost either. A ghost with a pulse, a body too dark for comfort, and too disciplined to react. A week later, Isaiah was on his way to a job interview for a night security position at a museum. He wore his cleanest shirt, pressed pants, and a faded blazer that had once fit better. He was early, always early, so he parked near a public park to calm his thoughts. He watched children play from a distance, a father push a stroller, and an old man feeding pigeons. The quiet for once didn't feel heavy. Then came the flashing lights. A police cruiser pulled up behind his car. No siren, just presence. Isaiah rolled down his window, hands visible on the wheel. The protocol drilled into every black man by mothers and uncles, and survival itself. 2 officers approached, one white, mid-40s, with mirrored sunglasses. The other younger, Latino, eyes flickering with uncertainty. "Sir, we got a report of a suspicious vehicle in the area," the white officer said. Isaiah nodded. "I'm waiting for a job interview. Here's the flyer." He reached slowly into the glove box, retrieved the printed email, and extended it with a calmness that had taken years to perfect. The officer barely glanced at it. "Step out of the vehicle." Isaiah hesitated, confused. "I haven't done anything." That wasn't a request. He stepped out. He didn't resist. His instincts told him any hesitation could trigger escalation. As he stood, the officer reached for his belt. The Latino officer looked away. "Spread your legs, hands on the hood." Isaiah complied. A pat-down began. Rougher than necessary. No questions. No explanations. "You got any weapons, military man?" "No." The officer paused. "What were you doing in Afghanistan?" Isaiah stiffened. "That's classified."
Funny how people say that when they got something to hide.
Isaiah said nothing. Within moments he was in handcuffs, accused of refusing to comply. A crowd gathered, phones came out, whispers turned into murmurs. The younger officer offered a half-hearted apology. "Just a misunderstanding, sir." But it wasn't, and they both knew it. As Isaiah sat in the back of the cruiser, the museum job interview slipping away with each passing second, he felt something break inside. Not rage, not fear, but a devastating confirmation. The same country that had once saluted him now crossed the street to avoid him. And as they pulled away from the curb, he caught a glimpse of the museum's entrance. A security guard in a crisp uniform was walking out to post a position-filled sign on the glass. At the station, when Isaiah calmly asks for his one phone call, the officer smirks and says, "Not for you." The judge echoes the same cold refusal minutes later in court. But before Isaiah can be processed, a federal agent bursts into the room, breathless. "We have order," directly from the Pentagon. The fluorescent lights inside courtroom 6B hummed like an electric warning. Cold, clinical, unrelenting. Isaiah Trenton sat at the defendant's table, wrists cuffed, ankles shackled, a dull throb pulsing through his ribcage, where a baton had struck during booking. The pain wasn't sharp, it was familiar, like the ache of silence, or the burn of being unseen. He wore the same faded blazer he'd chosen for the interview, now creased, soiled, and smelling faintly of cell floor bleach. His military-issued dog tags, once a symbol of purpose, had been confiscated as evidence. His posture was straight, spine military grade. But inside Isaiah simmered with a stillness more dangerous than rage. The kind of stillness forged from years of swallowing injustice. Moment after moment, knowing retaliation would only confirm every stereotype they were hoping he'd live up to. A white bailiff stood like a sentry beside him, hand twitching near the holster, gaze sharp with assumptions. Across the courtroom, the arresting officer sat smug, one eye purpled from the scuffle, a bruise Isaiah hadn't inflicted, but would be blamed for nonetheless. His police report claimed Isaiah had been combative, verbally threatening, a danger to public order. No mention of the 2 unnecessary baton strikes, the forceful search, the jeering comment whispered just before the cuffs clicked shut. "You think being a soldier makes you innocent?" The public defender assigned to Isaiah looked like a man overworked and underpaid. He didn't ask about Isaiah's service record. He didn't inquire about the circumstances. Instead, he whispered, "If you plead to resisting, they'll probably just give you probation. No jail time." Isaiah blinked slowly. "I didn't resist." The attorney sighed. "This court doesn't always care about that." Then came the moment. The judge entered. An older white woman with neatly pinned hair and a permanent frown carved deep into her face. Judge Lorraine Whitmore. Isaiah had researched her before dawn, using one of the jail's grimy terminals. Known for strict sentencing and zero tolerance, especially for cases involving non-compliance with law enforcement. She looked at Isaiah the way one might regard a leaking pipe. Inconvenient, irritating, disposable. "Mr. Trenton," she began, flipping through his file, You stand accused of resisting arrest, failing to comply with a lawful order, and exhibiting hostile behavior toward a peace officer. Isaiah raised his eyes. I was sitting in my car. The judge didn't look up. The officer involved reported you displayed aggressive body language, refused to follow commands, and were verbally combative. I gave him my paperwork, Isaiah said. I told him I was going to an interview. He never asked another question. Her lips pressed into a thin line. And yet here we are. The prosecutor, a young assistant DA in a sharp blue suit, stood to speak. He barely addressed Isaiah. This is not Mr. Trenton's first encounter with authority, he said, gesturing to a screen. We have evidence of a prior altercation in 2015 during a protest in Atlanta. Charges dismissed, yes, but a pattern begins to emerge. Mr. Trenton clearly has issues with compliance. That protest was peaceful. Isaiah interrupted, and I was de-escalating the situation. I was thanked by the community leaders. The judge banged her gavel lightly. You'll speak when addressed, Mr. Trenton. His mouth closed, jaw tightening, fury swallowed yet again. The attorney didn't object. He leaned closer and whispered, You're not helping your case. I wasn't helping a lie either, Isaiah replied, his voice low but firm. The judge resumed reading. You have no current employment, no listed permanent address, and no contact provided for family or legal counsel. Isaiah stared at her. I requested a phone call. She looked at the bailiff. He shrugged. Isaiah's voice grew sharper. I requested a phone call. Multiple times. I was denied. Is there proof of that? The judge asked flatly. How would I prove what you refused to allow? The courtroom tensed. A few observers, mostly law students and local residents, summoned for jury duty, exchanged uncomfortable glances. The dynamic was becoming impossible to ignore. This wasn't about law. It was about perception, control, erasure. Isaiah leaned forward, his voice steady but heavy with the pain of recognition. You see a charge, not a man. You read a report, not a record. I served this country. I risked my life for it. I buried brothers overseas for it. And now, I can't even get a phone call. The judge looked up at him then. Finally, but her eyes held no empathy, only discomfort, and a strange kind of irritation, like she was being publicly challenged by someone who hadn't earned the right to speak. We are not here to discuss your military record, Mr. Trenton, she said sharply. We're here to address your behavior during a lawful traffic investigation. Isaiah nodded once, slowly. The message was clear. Your service does not shield you. Your past means nothing here. This isn't just about justice, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. It's about erasure. Judge Whitmore cleared her throat. Your request for a phone call is noted. However, given the nature of the incident and the lack of verifiable contacts, the court sees no immediate legal necessity to grant that privilege at this time. Isaiah's eyes narrowed. Privilege? She didn't respond. The courtroom was silent. Even the bailiff looked uneasy. Denied, she said again, more firmly this time. Isaiah leaned back slowly, the metal cuffs clinking against the bench. In that moment, he wasn't surprised. Not anymore. Just profoundly, wearily disappointed. Time seemed to slow. The judge flipped a page. The DA sat down, satisfied. The public defender checked his phone. And then 5 minutes later, as the clerk began organizing paperwork, the courtroom doors burst open. A man in a dark suit and Department of Defense badge rushed in, flanked by 2 federal agents. The judge jolted upright, startled. Your Honor, the man said, breathless, voice urgent. We have immediate orders from the Pentagon. Mr. Trenton is to be released into federal custody, effective immediately. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Judge Whitmore's mouth parted. On what grounds? The agent didn't blink. Classified. Even Isaiah looked stunned. His mind raced. He hadn't contacted anyone. He hadn't spoken a word outside that courtroom since his arrest. Who knew? Who reached out? As the judge stammered for clarification, the agent turned toward Isaiah and pulled a folded sheet of paper from his coat. It bore the insignia of the Department of Defense and a line of text stamped in red, Operation Echo Depth, Executive Recall Authority, activated. Before Isaiah can ask a single question, the agent leans in and whispers something that freezes the blood in his veins. They were never supposed to find you. The courtroom that had just seconds before hummed with routine tension, now cracked wide open with shock. A federal agent, tall, dark-suited, and visibly sweating, stood in the doorway, the American flag insignia glinting from his lapel like a second badge of authority. The room fell into suspended breath as murmurs bubbled up from every corner. The judge, momentarily stripped of her dominance, looked toward the intruder with confusion that quickly morphed into discomfort. "Who authorized this interruption?" she asked, voice pitched higher than intended. The man held up a government-embossed document. "Department of Defense," he said firmly, walking toward the bench without waiting for permission. "Executive recall order. It pertains to the defendant, Isaiah Trenton." Isaiah, still bound at the wrist and ankles, turned slowly. His heart began pounding, not with relief, not even with hope, but with a wary dread. He had seen that insignia before, under different flags, different wars. The Pentagon did not call unless something had gone wrong. Very wrong. Judge Whitmore, visibly flustered, adjusted her robe and leaned forward. "This is highly irregular." The agent's tone didn't shift. "Classified authorization. Direct from Pentagon command. Mr. Trenton is to be removed from civilian jurisdiction immediately." The prosecutor shot up from his seat. "On what grounds?" The agent's response came without hesitation. "National interest. Internal military investigation." "He's not under your purview anymore." Gasps followed. A court clerk whispered something to the stenographer, who stopped typing, stunned. Even the arresting officer's smug confidence began to visibly fray. The idea that a man he had publicly humiliated, a black veteran arrested under the banner of petty resistance, was suddenly the focus of top-tier federal attention, did not sit cleanly. The pieces didn't fit. Judge Whitmore stood. "This court has not been formally briefed. I won't allow." "You don't need to be briefed," the agent said, sharper now. "That's the point. It's above your pay grade." A hush dropped over the room, like a velvet curtain. Even the bailiff stepped back instinctively. The shift in power was undeniable. What had been a routine racial dismissal, sealed with authority and dressed in legalese, was now something else entirely. The power structure, the predictable lines of supremacy, had fractured. Isaiah remained still, watching everyone. The confusion, the fear, the unraveling. No one was speaking directly to him, but he felt the weight of every eye. He saw the recalculations, the quiet scrambling to understand what they had misjudged. And underneath it all, he recognized the one feeling they were too proud to name: shame. The agent moved toward him. "Mr. Trenton, you're coming with us." Isaiah didn't move.
"Why now?"
The man leaned in, voice low, nearly imperceptible. "They were never supposed to find you." The words landed like cold steel in Isaiah's chest. The courtroom seemed to tilt. Suddenly, Isaiah wasn't just a forgotten veteran anymore. He was something else entirely. Something that had managed to both slip through the cracks and survive being buried in them. And now someone very powerful had realized the loose end was still breathing. The judge clung to whatever control she had left. "This man is in custody. You can't just take him." "We already have," the agent said. "Your authority ends here." And just like that, the courtroom was ordered to be cleared. Bailiffs ushered the audience out. Reporters who had begun to stir were silenced by whispered warnings. Within minutes, the once public hearing was emptied, sanitized. Only Isaiah, the agent, the judge, and two quiet federal operatives remained. Outside, the hallway buzzed with curiosity. But inside the courtroom, the temperature dropped. Isaiah stood, cuffs still locked. "You want to tell me why the Pentagon just stepped in like I'm some lost weapon?" The agent nodded toward the operatives, who began collecting files, unplugging court recorders, and disabling surveillance feeds. "Because you are." Judge Whitmore, now pale, stepped off the bench. "This is absurd. He's a defendant, not a national asset." The agent turned to her. "He's more than that. He's a liability to the story we built around Operation Echo Depth." That name. Isaiah felt his knees stiffen. Operation Echo Depth. A mission he wasn't supposed to remember. A rescue that turned into an ambush. A success built on the failure of truth. He had buried that word in the same mental graveyard where the rest of his classified service lay. And yet here it was, dragged back into the light by men in suits who had once ordered him into darkness. "What does this have to do with now?" Isaiah asked. "I've been out for years." The agent looked him in the eye, calm but grave. "Because we found something. Something linked to you. And if it goes public, the entire scaffolding collapses. Medals, reports, careers, maybe even administrations." The judge stepped back, suddenly smaller. You're talking about a cover-up. No, the agent said coldly. We're talking about preservation. Isaiah shook his head. So now I'm the threat. You always were, the agent replied. We just forgot about you long enough to think it didn't matter. Silence hung between them like a verdict. Isaiah sat down slowly, the chains on his wrists heavier than before, not because they were real, but because now, he knew who had locked them. The agent opens a black dossier and slides it across the table to Isaiah. Inside is a photo. Grainy, low-res, but unmistakable. It's him, mid-mission, cradling the body of a civilian girl. A girl the military claimed never existed. Below it a timestamp, and under that a handwritten note. You weren't supposed to survive this. The grainy photograph stared up at Isaiah like a wound that had never closed. The girl's face, dirt-streaked, unconscious, no older than 9, was cradled in his arms, her tiny body wrapped in pieces of his uniform. His expression in the image was unreadable, almost mechanical, but Isaiah remembered exactly how he'd felt in that moment. Terrified, not of gunfire, not of the enemy, but of what he had just done, what he had chosen to do against orders. Operation Echo Depth had never been meant for memory. It was a ghost mission, buried beneath layers of black ink and redacted reports, disguised by false coordinates and generic headlines. The official story said a team was deployed to monitor insurgent movement near the Sudanese border. What actually happened was something else entirely. The Pentagon agent's voice had faded into silence behind him, the courtroom now empty of everything but memory and consequence. Isaiah stared at the photo and was no longer in a suit of shackles, but back in the sweltering heat of East Africa, the buzz of military comms in his ear, sand clinging to his eyelashes like dust from another lifetime. Their objective had been surgical: locate and extract 2 U.S. contractors, held hostage by a rebel faction. Simple, clean, fast. Or so they were told. But as the Black Hawk dropped them onto the edge of the village, Isaiah's instincts warned him something was wrong. The mission brief didn't mention the sheer number of structures. The maps were outdated, and there were children. So many children. They found the contractors shackled to a rusted pipe, inside a concrete shell of a building. Malnourished but alive. That part was true, but just yards away, huddled behind a collapsed wall, were nearly 24 civilians, women, and children, barely clothed, starving, trembling. Some had wounds clearly inflicted by those same captors. Sergeant Lowell, their white squad leader, made the call immediately. We exfil with the contractors only. Civilians are not part of the mission. Isaiah stepped forward. We can't leave them. They're not ours. Our directive is clear. They'll die. Lowell didn't blink. Then they die. Orders are orders. Isaiah didn't argue further. He knew better. Arguing didn't change anything in the field. Not with officers like Lowell. Not when you were the only black man on the team. Instead, he waited, and when the first chopper loaded with the contractors lifted off, Isaiah disappeared into the shadows and circled back. He moved quickly, methodically. He used stolen radio batteries to power a flashlight. He handed out water packets from his gear. He radioed coordinates to a humanitarian supply unit he'd once worked with, off the books, and begged for an unsanctioned pickup. He marked paths in the dirt with chalk and rocks. He carried 3 children on his own back to the exfiltration site. In the end, 14 civilians were airlifted out by a South African NGO. 3 more died during the wait. And Isaiah never made it onto the return flight with his team. He was picked up 2 days later by another U.S. unit, dehydrated, semi-conscious, still clutching the photo of the girl. He expected to be reprimanded, maybe even court-martialed. Instead, he was debriefed in a windowless room at a NATO facility in Djibouti. 2 intelligence officers he'd never met before, both white, both polished, like stone, asked no questions about the rescue, only about what he saw, what names he remembered, whether any photos were taken, whether he had spoken to the media. Then came silence. Weeks passed. No new assignments, no commendations, no reprimand. When his discharge papers came, they were sealed with the words, "In the interest of classified operational protocol." No ceremony, no flag, just a flight home and a warning. Never speak of Echo Depth. Isaiah had held on to that silence like a curse. He watched stories on the news twist the mission into a sanitized tale of hostage recovery. The civilians were never mentioned. The photos were never released. Sergeant Lowell was promoted. And Isaiah became invisible. Back in the present, the agent's voice cut through his thoughts. You were supposed to follow protocol. You didn't. Isaiah looked up. So you erased me. No, the agent said. We protected the greater narrative. You endangered more than just lives. You threatened the balance. There's power in stories, Mr. Trenton. Yours didn't fit. Isaiah stood, the chains between his wrists clinking like the final punctuation to a long-buried truth. My story saved lives, but it undermines structure, the agent replied, and that's a greater threat than you realize. Isaiah shook his head slowly. So you buried it all. Every detail. Even her. He held up the photo again. The little girl, her name was Anani. He'd learned it from the oldest woman in the group. She'd held Isaiah's hand as the helicopter lifted them away, and whispered, "You are not like them." And now, years later, the government that had begged him for silence was begging again. Only this time, it wasn't with words, it was with fear. Isaiah leaned closer, voice tight. Why now? Why dig this up? The agent didn't answer. Instead, he opened another folder. Inside was a satellite image, dated 2 weeks ago. The village, flattened, no survivors. Someone talked, the agent said grimly. Someone who saw your file, the civilians you saved. They became evidence, so the village was erased. Isaiah's breath caught in his throat. Erased? Not officially. A suspected insurgent stronghold. Collateral damage. Isaiah's stomach turned. The heat of the courtroom seemed to close in on him. We need you silent again, the agent said. I'm not your property, Isaiah replied. No, the agent said, standing. You're a risk. As Isaiah prepared to respond, the second agent, who had remained silent the entire time, spoke for the first time, pulling a tablet from his case and sliding it forward. The screen lit up with a video clip. Shaky, low-res footage. Anani, older now, standing in front of a campfire, speaking in English. The American soldier, Isaiah. He saved us. I know his face. He is not dead. He is truth. And then, before Isaiah could react, the screen cut to black. A single word flashed in red. Leak. The Medal of Honor recommendation was written in a language Isaiah never saw. He found out about it through a whispered conversation, 2 weeks after his extraction. A fellow soldier, Corporal Delgado, had slipped him a nod in the mess hall of the Djibouti base. They're putting you in for the big one, he'd murmured. Medal of Honor. Someone upstairs finally saw what you did. Isaiah didn't respond, not because he wasn't moved, but because he didn't believe it. He knew how stories were filtered through the military machine. What he did in Echo Depth wasn't just unsanctioned. It was defiant. Heroism in their eyes wasn't about saving lives. It was about following orders. But 3 days later, confirmation came. A classified commendation memo surfaced on an encrypted terminal in a secure bay. Isaiah's name was on it. A commendation for unparalleled courage and decisive action, resulting in the preservation of civilian life during unsanctioned encounter. The phrasing was cautious, but the intent was unmistakable. He had been. The base commander, Colonel Bledsoe, even summoned him for a formal sit-down. The old man, stiff-backed, hawk-eyed, looked at Isaiah like he was still trying to decide whether to salute him or discharge him. We're reviewing the footage, Bledsoe had said flatly. The nomination's unofficial until DC signs off. Keep quiet for now. Isaiah nodded once. Of course, sir. But in the corner of Bledsoe's office, a silent man in civilian clothes had watched the entire exchange. He never spoke, never blinked, just watched. Isaiah knew then. Something was wrong. Over the next few days, rumors swirled. Fellow soldiers clapped him on the back in the gym. A few mechanics from the motor pool saluted him in passing. An NGO staffer slipped him a note. You did the right thing. I saw her smile. Even a senior nurse from the field hospital told him one of the rescued women had asked about him. It was a soft ripple, but it was real. Then, it stopped. Suddenly, the salutes disappeared. The smiles faded. People avoided him in corridors. Delgado stopped speaking altogether. And when Isaiah returned to the terminal bay to check the commendation file, it was gone. No trace. Not archived. Not redacted. Erased. When he inquired through the official chain of command, he received a form letter response. No current nomination on record for Sergeant Isaiah Trenton. The rest followed quickly. His mission debrief was sealed without his signature. His housing was changed without notice. His deployment record suddenly bore a disciplinary note. Insubordination under combat protocol. Even the girl's name, Anani, was removed from the NGO's recovery list. In her place was a blank space. Isaiah confronted Bledsoe. The colonel looked away. I was overruled. By who? Isaiah asked. They didn't give names. Isaiah leaned closer, voice tight. You let them rewrite history. Bledsoe's jaw twitched. History's written by stability. You disrupted that. Isaiah walked out of that office without another word. In the eyes of the military, he wasn't a hero. He was a liability dressed in camo. The twist came 2 days later. He received a small envelope, no return address. It had been slipped under his bunk in the middle of the night. Inside was a single sheet of paper, printed in all caps. They know you remember. Below it was a string of digits, a government reference code, followed by a file name Isaiah recognized instantly. OP Echo X789, Lieutenant Lucas Payne. Isaiah froze. That name had haunted him for years. Payne had been a junior officer attached to Echo Depth for oversight. Barely 27, fresh from West Point, all ambition and arrogance. He was nowhere near the civilians when the mission erupted into chaos. In fact, he had left early under the pretense of securing airlift for the contractors. But when the story broke weeks later, Payne's name was at the center of it. He was the one praised in the sanitized report. The official narrative read, Lieutenant Payne coordinated a successful recovery of key civilian personnel with minimal casualties. Payne had earned a promotion, a medal, and a feature in Stars and Stripes, complete with a photo of him shaking hands with generals who had never heard a Naney's name. Isaiah had remained silent then, unsure whether his truth would make a dent. But now that file, OP Keko X789, was staring back at him like a match doused in gasoline. He accessed a secure computer in the comms center during a shift when the room was supposed to be empty. He entered the code. To his shock, the file was active. A memo from internal review cited inconsistencies in Payne's testimony. Eyewitnesses had been uncooperative, unclear, or misinformed. The file included typed statements from 3 soldiers who had since been transferred or retired. All 3 had once supported Isaiah's nomination. Now each claimed they couldn't recall specifics. One even wrote, Sergeant Trenton's actions were commendable but exaggerated. Isaiah leaned back in the metal chair, heart pounding. This wasn't just gaslighting. It was surgical sabotage. They had erased his heroism to protect someone else's lie. And not just someone, a white someone. A man who could be photographed, promoted, handed honors without raising questions. A man who followed the script. A man whose skin didn't make the truth inconvenient. The rage wasn't loud. It wasn't even hot. It was cold, controlled, precision cut. He had been cut out of his own story so another man could wear it like a badge. Back in his bunk, Isaiah stared at the anonymous letter again. The phrasing chilled him. They know you remember. That wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. Someone out there wanted him to act. But why now? What had changed? And who had sent it? He flipped the paper over. A faint watermark bled through under the light. A crest he hadn't seen since his first deployment. The insignia of Joint Special Operations Command. Someone inside the system was reaching out. Someone who knew the truth wasn't just buried. It was alive and breathing. Just before lights out, Isaiah received a second envelope. Inside was a photo, recent, taken in daylight. It showed Lucas Payne stepping into a private car outside the Capitol building. On the back, in the same font as before, a single sentence. He's running for office. And he's using your story. The photograph in Isaiah's hand was barely a day old. Lucas Payne, clean-shaven, polished, a suit tailored to congressional standards, stepping into a black government vehicle, one hand raised as if already waving to invisible voters. His posture was rehearsed, smooth, the kind that comes from years of being coached by people paid to reshape narratives. But it was his eyes that caught Isaiah's attention. They were not proud. They were alert, watchful. As if somewhere in the back of his mind, Lucas still feared the return of the truth. The man who had vanished after Operation Echo Depth was now standing beneath the Capitol dome, rewriting a legacy he never earned. And the country, the media, the donors, the voters, welcomed him with open arms, hailing him as a rising star of defense policy and integrity. His bio listed combat honors, but the mission that birthed them, nowhere to be found, redacted, like Isaiah himself. Isaiah hadn't slept in 36 hours. His room, now tucked inside a secure federal safe house, was stripped of comfort, concrete walls, a cot, and a small desk where he spent the last night, digging through military archives, open-source government briefings, and deep web whistleblower databases. What emerged was a pattern that left him sick. Emails traced from a Pentagon staffer, buried in metadata logs, revealed a disturbing thread. A month after Echo Depth, Lucas Payne had been fast-tracked for promotion. The citation used language Isaiah recognized almost word for word from the commendation he had once seen with his own name on it. The wording was unmistakable. In an unsanctioned yet life-saving deviation from combat orders, Payne led the extraction of endangered civilians under extreme duress. The lie wasn't just copied. It had been clothed in white skin and elevated into policy. Isaiah clicked deeper, uncovering an internal memo from a retired colonel to a congressional aide. The message was blunt. Payne is perfect, clean, articulate, moldable. Turn Echo Depth into a blueprint for ethical warfare. Just leave the rogue NCO out of it. Rogue NCO. That was Isaiah. Not a man who saved 14 lives. Not a soldier who risked everything to do what was right. Just a variable they couldn't control. It wasn't just about stolen valor anymore. It was about identity theft. The emotional kind. The legacy kind. The kind that rewrites black truth into white comfort. Isaiah closed the files and stared at the wall. Every breath felt heavier. Every beat of his heart reminded him that the only reason Lucas Payne had the life he now led was because Isaiah had once chosen compassion over obedience. And now that same man was preparing to run for a congressional seat, campaigning on a record built atop someone else's sacrifice. The secure phone in the room buzzed. Isaiah picked up. A gravelly voice spoke on the other end. He's speaking at a fundraiser in Arlington. 2 hours. Private event. We'll get you in. Isaiah didn't ask who we was. He didn't care. Someone inside the machine wanted the truth to surface. And he was ready. The event was held at a colonial estate. Red bricks, white columns, the whole illusion of America's dignified past. The type of place that once held slaves and now hosted senators. Security was tight, but Isaiah was already inside by the time the second SUV pulled in. He wore a maintenance badge, holding a clipboard with fake inspection orders. No one questioned him. He waited in a back corridor near the kitchen, heart steady, until he saw Payne walk past, flanked by aides, jaw tight. For a brief second, their eyes met. Lucas froze. It was like seeing a ghost from a war he had written himself out of. His face drained of color. The staffers around him kept walking, unaware that the very man their candidate had plagiarized into power was now within arm's reach. Isaiah didn't move. He wanted Lucas to sit with that fear, to remember what it felt like to be exposed.
Minutes later, one of the aides returned.
Mr. Payne would like a word. Privately. Isaiah followed her to a side office. Lucas stood alone near a window, back straight, expression unreadable. I knew it was only a matter of time, Lucas said quietly, not turning. Isaiah stepped in, closed the door. You disappeared. I followed orders. No, Isaiah said, voice sharp. You followed. Silence. And let them bury the rest of us under it. Lucas finally turned, eyes searching. You think I had control? I was 27. They handed me a promotion and told me to shut up. You think I could stop the machine? You didn't have to start it with my name. Lucas exhaled. I didn't write the reports, but you let them stand. You stood on them. Lucas's jaw clenched. I didn't expect you to survive. No one did. They said you never made it back to base. When I heard you'd been discharged, I assumed. Isaiah stepped closer. You assumed I was dead, and you built your life like I was. Lucas looked away. I carried her, Isaiah said, his voice barely above a whisper. Anani, she was 9. You never even saw her. Lucas's face contorted. I never wanted this. I didn't have your courage. Isaiah didn't flinch. Don't confuse compliance with cowardice. You didn't lack courage. You lacked integrity. A silence stretched between them, filled only by muffled music from the ballroom down the hall. Isaiah turned to leave. Wait, Lucas said. They're watching both of us now. You think you're exposing them, but you're just giving them reason to erase you again. Isaiah paused, hand on the doorknob. Then they'll have to try harder. As Isaiah stepped out of the room, a young woman brushed past him, a staffer, clipboard in hand. But something in her eyes stopped him cold. She turned just slightly and whispered under her breath, I know who you are, and so does he. She kept walking. On her clipboard, Isaiah caught the edge of a note, one name circled. Isaiah didn't look back until the hallway turned silent again. The woman with the clipboard was gone. But her words clung to him like smoke. I know who you are. And so does he. That name, Anani, scribbled on her notepad like a whispered prophecy, pulsed behind his eyes. Questions circled. Questions that had no safe answers. Who was she? Why now? And what did she know that Isaiah didn't? He ducked into a maintenance alcove and pulled out his phone. No service. No signal. Just the static hum of the building's controlled air and the faint echoes of laughter from the fundraiser's ballroom. He stayed there, breath slow, until he heard a voice behind him. You weren't supposed to see that. Isaiah turned. Lucas Payne stood there, more human now, stripped of the candidate's mask. No handlers, no smile, just a man carrying the weight of a story that wasn't his to tell. Isaiah didn't move. Is she working for you? Lucas shook his head. She's not with the campaign. She's deeper than that. There are people inside, people who've been watching since Echo Depth. You mean watching me? Isaiah said, voice low. Lucas nodded. And me. But you more. Isaiah's patience snapped. Then tell me the whole truth. Not the PR version. Not the approved summary. What happened after the mission? Who changed the reports? Who buried it? Lucas leaned against the wall, eyes tired. It wasn't just you, Isaiah. What happened to you wasn't a one-time erasure. It's part of a pattern, long before Echo Depth, and still happening today. Isaiah folded his arms. Start talking. Lucas swallowed hard, gathering himself. When I got back stateside, there were already 2 different debrief files waiting for me. One written by our field intelligence team, and the other rewritten by the Joint Military Commendations Office. The first one mentioned your name. The second didn't. That second version, it's the one they published. That's the story that went to Congress, to the press, to every promotion board. Isaiah blinked. They erased me in the official record. Not just erased, Lucas said. They recycled your valor. They reframed the entire mission so it looked like a white officer, me, acted against impossible odds to save civilians. You were turned into background noise, a footnote under supporting personnel. Isaiah laughed. Short, bitter. Stolen valor. Nationally televised plagiarism. Lucas nodded. Exactly. But the rot goes deeper. He stepped forward, lowering his voice. There's an unofficial system inside the Defense Commendation Network, DCN. They don't call it racist, of course, but it is. Certain names get flagged for strategic promotion. Usually white officers from elite academies, West Point, Annapolis. The stories tied to those names are curated, spotlighted, accelerated. Meanwhile, cases tied to black soldiers, especially enlisted, get flagged for further review. That means delay. That means bury. Isaiah felt a chill creep across his spine. And they've been doing this for how long?
Lucas didn't answer. Instead, he pulled something from his jacket pocket. A flash drive, matte black, the kind used in top-tier intelligence circles. This drive has internal emails, nomination drafts, promotion flowcharts, and alteration timestamps. Your name appears 15 times across 4 branches. Each time, your recommendation was redirected or replaced with someone else's.
Isaiah stared at the drive, his pulse racing. How the hell did you get this? Lucas hesitated. After my promotion, I started to feel it. The lie breathing down my neck. I asked questions. Got stonewalled, so I used my clearance to pull records before they locked me out. It took years to collect it all, but I kept it. Why? Isaiah's voice cracked. Why would you keep something that could destroy you? Because it already did, Lucas said softly. You think I've been thriving? I've been choking on guilt. Every time someone called me a hero, every time I see my face on a campaign poster, I think of her, Anani, and you. The silence was supposed to protect me, but it just poisoned everything. Isaiah took the drive, fingers trembling slightly. Lucas wasn't done. This goes beyond you. There are dozens, maybe hundreds of black servicemen and women who were nominated and then erased. Some never even knew. Some were told they didn't qualify. Some just disappeared. Isaiah looked up. And they all suffered so someone else could be uplifted. Lucas nodded, ashamed. They built monuments with your bones. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The air between them was thick with grief and reckoning. There was no closure here, only layers of truth, suffocating and sharp. Isaiah broke the silence. If this gets out, it won't just destroy your campaign. It could unravel trust in the entire military commendation system. I know, Lucas said. That's why I'm giving it to you. Because I don't deserve to hold it. Isaiah took a deep breath, trying to process the magnitude of it all. Every insult, every door slammed shut, every job lost, every silent nod from fellow Black veterans who carried the same weight and never knew why it dragged them down. It hadn't been imagined. It had been designed. Isaiah clenched the drive in his fist. They turned our loyalty into leverage, used our obedience as camouflage. Lucas gave a faint nod, and they made sure we never questioned it. Isaiah stepped back, the hallway lights casting his shadow long against the wall. I'm not staying silent anymore. Lucas didn't argue. I don't expect you to. Isaiah turned to leave, but his phone buzzed again, this time a blocked number. He answered without thinking. The voice on the other end was female, calm, deliberate. Mr. Trenton, if you publish that drive, be ready to answer for what happened in Nandala. Because not everyone in that village was who you think they were. The line went dead. Isaiah froze. He had never spoken that village name aloud. Not once. Not even in his debrief. Someone knew everything. The flash drive felt heavier now, as though it had absorbed the warning through the phone and turned cold in Isaiah's hand. Ndala. The village. The mission that had upended everything. He hadn't spoken that name to anyone. Not even to Lucas. It wasn't written in the redacted files, or the Pentagon leaks. Yet someone knew. And whoever it was, they weren't just watching, they were circling. He spent the next 36 hours trying to decide who to trust. The classified drive contained raw data, timestamps, military communications, commendation revisions, and decrypted personnel records. It proved, with horrifying clarity, that Black service members had been systemically scrubbed from recognition. Some of them had been nominated multiple times, others were replaced outright. Isaiah's own file was buried beneath 4 levels of security clearance, altered beyond recognition, and rerouted under Lucas Payne's name. He reached out to 3 journalists, each with top-tier clearance and experience in military exposés. 2 of them didn't respond. The third, a seasoned investigative reporter named Nina Banks, replied once, "Sounds serious. Call me." But when he did, the line rang once and dropped. He called again. Nothing. That evening, he drove to her office in D.C. The receptionist looked confused. "Nina doesn't work here anymore. She resigned this morning. Effective immediately." Isaiah stood there stunned. "Did she say why?" The woman hesitated, lowering her voice. She said something about a story too big to survive. By the time he got back to his car, he saw the unmarked sedan parked across the street. Same vehicle that had trailed him from Lucas Payne's fundraiser. It wasn't a question of if he was being watched. It was now about when they'd move. Isaiah didn't scare easily. But the silence closing in around him wasn't just fear, it was erasure in real time. By morning, the retaliation had begun. A news segment aired across regional channels. The headline was surgical. Former Marine faces mental health crisis. Sources say he's dangerous, delusional. The voiceover detailed his arrest at the courthouse, framed it as an escalation from long-standing behavioral issues, and referenced to unnamed sources inside the Department of Veterans Affairs. Photos of him in cuffs were broadcast nationwide. The context was gone. Online, the headlines mutated further. Unstable vet goes rogue. Black soldier turns on country he once served. Twitter threads spun wild theories, that he'd joined a foreign resistance group, that he was plotting domestic terror, that his heroism had always been exaggerated. Isaiah watched from the safe house, remote in hand, teeth clenched. The uniform hadn't saved him, not in the field, not in the courtroom, and certainly not in the court of public opinion. To be Black in uniform, Isaiah realized, meant you were always one narrative away from becoming an enemy. He decided to release the drive himself. He encrypted the files and uploaded them to an anonymous cloud database. He drafted a statement, raw, precise, emotional. He told the world what was done to him, what was done to hundreds of others, and how stolen valor wasn't just about medals. It was about memory, about legacy, about the right to be remembered, truthfully. Then he hit send. The files were set to go live within 24 hours across 3 media platforms and a private archive used by whistleblower watchdog groups. But within 3 hours, everything crashed. His email account was locked. The cloud platform server went offline. The watchdog website posted a message, content temporarily removed, due to potential breach of national security. Isaiah's laptop screen turned black. A blinking cursor appeared in the top left corner, then vanished. In its place, a message. You've made your choice. He was being shut down digitally and physically. That night, he was pulled over. It was a routine stop, at least at first. He knew better than to make sudden movements. He kept both hands on the steering wheel, rolled the window down with care. 2 officers approached, one white, one black. The white officer asked for his license and registration. The black officer just stared. Isaiah handed over the documents. "Is there a problem, officers?" The white officer tilted his head. "Your tags were reported as suspicious." Isaiah raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious tags?" "Yeah, the kind connected to unstable individuals." Isaiah kept his voice even. "You're using a traffic stop to deliver a warning." The white officer smirked. "We're just doing our job." The black officer remained silent. But as his partner returned to the cruiser to run the plates, he leaned in closer. His voice was barely above a whisper. "They've put a bounty on your silence." Isaiah stared at him, heart thudding. "What did you say?" The officer stepped back, eyes shifting toward the patrol car. "Be careful where you walk. You're not protected out here." Then he turned and walked away. The second officer returned moments later, handed Isaiah's ID back, and said, "You're free to go." Isaiah didn't move. His hands gripped the wheel tighter than necessary. The phrase echoed in his skull. "They've put a bounty on your silence." This wasn't just character assassination. It was tactical, measured, lethal. They weren't trying to scare him. They were setting him up to fall apart, and if he didn't implode, they'd help him along. The blue wall of silence was closing in, reinforced not just by police, but by media, data systems, legal barriers. And underneath it all was something colder, racial manipulation, dressed in procedural language. The system wasn't malfunctioning. It was performing exactly as it was designed. Isaiah drove in silence for hours. Every car behind him a shadow. Every streetlight a surveillance node. He no longer trusted traffic cameras or GPS signals. He used paper maps now, flipped through the pages like a soldier moving through hostile territory. He remembered something his father once told him. Back when Isaiah was a teenager. Before the Marines. Before Echo Depth. Before the world had taught him what his skin meant in a uniformed body. "Son, you can serve this country all your life. But the second it serves you fear, you better learn how to stand for yourself." Isaiah understood now. They didn't just want to erase the files. They wanted to erase the man who dared remember them. That night, Isaiah returned to his safe house and found the door slightly ajar. On the kitchen counter was a manila envelope addressed in shaky handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You won't live to see the upload. Trust me, I didn't." At the bottom, scrawled in fading ink, was the signature of a name Isaiah hadn't heard in years. Corporal R. Delgado, the man who once whispered about the Medal of Honor. A man Isaiah believed. The envelope from Delgado shook in Isaiah's hands like a memory refusing to be ignored. His name, scrawled in uneven black ink, seemed to tremble with warning from beyond the grave. Corporal Delgado had disappeared from the ranks quietly, back when the weight of Echo Depth began to collapse on those who dared remember it. Truthfully, most assumed he'd relocated, discharged early, or lost to the maze of VA bureaucracy. But the signature before Isaiah now whispered a different truth. Delgado hadn't vanished. He had been buried intentionally, quietly, and long before his time. Isaiah sat in the cold kitchen, the only light coming from the open refrigerator door. His reflection stared back from the darkened window, gaunt and worn. Delgado's message played on repeat in his head. "You won't live to see the upload. Trust me, I didn't." It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was prophecy. He pressed his palms to the table, the wood damp with condensation from a sweating water bottle. The system hadn't just come for him. It had devoured generations. And suddenly, like a distant echo finally making its way home, Isaiah thought of his father. James Trenton had served in Vietnam, a reconnaissance scout with the 25th Infantry Division, fluent in jungle terrain, and reading signs no satellite could see. Growing up, Isaiah had only heard fragments of his father's story, told in late-night tones, halfway through a bottle of bourbon, always with a look in his eyes that said the war had never really ended. His medals were packed in an old cigar box hidden in the attic, not displayed, not discussed. As a child, Isaiah thought his father was simply modest. As a man, he now understood. He drove through the early hours of the morning, the safe house far behind, shadows tailing him invisibly. He didn't call ahead. He needed to look his mother in the eye. Her home hadn't changed much in years. The same screen door that creaked, the same faded flag in the flower bed. She opened the door with a cautious smile, one that melted into worry the moment she saw his face. "Baby, what's happened?" Isaiah stepped inside, enveloped in the scent of lemon oil and old books. "Mom, I need to talk to you about Dad." She paused, hand tightening around the doorknob. "You sure about that?" Isaiah nodded slowly. "I think I've seen more of him in the last few days than I ever did growing up." She led him to the kitchen. The same chair, the same ceramic bowl on the table, filled with decades of unopened mail. He sat. She poured coffee. Neither of them touched it. "I think he went through what I'm going through now," Isaiah said quietly. The recognition denied. The silence forced. "I need to know how far it goes, Mom. I need to know if this pattern is older than me." She sat across from him and sighed. "Your father. He came home from Vietnam with a chest full of scars and a box full of nothing." Isaiah listened as she began to peel back years of secrecy. "He saved 3 white soldiers during an ambush in the Kontum province," she said. "Dragged them through sniper fire, applied tourniquets with his belt, held position alone, until backup came. They gave one of those boys the Silver Star. Another got a full ride to Annapolis. Your father, they demoted him before discharge." Isaiah felt his stomach twist. For what? They said he endangered the mission by disobeying orders. Truth is, he refused to abandon a Vietnamese interpreter who'd been left behind. They said that wasn't part of the protocol. Isaiah's throat tightened. It was the same script, just recycled across generations. The same weaponized language of discipline. The same betrayal wrapped in military phrasing. "He never spoke about it," she continued. "Not really. But I saw the way he changed, how the silence weighed on him. He'd flinch at sirens. He'd avoid parades. And whenever Veterans Day rolled around, he'd sit in that chair and drink in silence." Isaiah looked down at his hands. "So this system, it didn't start with me." "No, baby," she whispered. "It started long before either of us." He thought about the medals that weren't awarded, the honors that were reassigned, the names that were rewritten. America remembered its wars, but not all its warriors. "What happened to the others from his unit?" Isaiah asked. She shook her head. Some wrote letters, apologies. Others vanished. But there was one man, Captain Alden, who stayed in touch. "He knew what your father did. He tried to push for a correction years later." "What happened?" "He died. Heart attack. Just weeks after submitting the petition." Isaiah's jaw clenched. "Convenient." She hesitated then, glancing toward the hallway. "There's something I need to show you," she said, standing up. "I promised him I never would. But I think he'd understand now." She disappeared down the hall. Isaiah followed, past old family portraits and faded wallpaper. She stopped at the linen closet, reached behind a shelf of towels, and pulled out a small key. Then she led him into the garage, to an old cabinet pressed against the back wall. Inside, hidden behind layers of family tax records and broken power tools, was a locked metal box. She opened it slowly. Inside were faded documents, yellowed with age, photos, letters, and at the very bottom, a small envelope, marked Safe Deposit Box, Union Trust Bank. Isaiah picked it up. "You kept it?" He said if you ever came looking for answers, this was the last piece. His fingers closed around the envelope like it was a trigger. "What's in it?" he asked. Her eyes shimmered. His last truth. The part he never had the strength to face out loud. Isaiah stared at the address on the envelope. Union Trust Bank, Richmond Branch. It was still operational. His heart pounded. His father, long dead, had left behind a key, not just to the past but to the next chapter in Isaiah's unraveling truth. As Isaiah turned the envelope over, a second note slipped out, folded and faintly marked. It wasn't in his father's handwriting. It was dated years later. "Isaiah, I found what they did to your father. You were never the first. There are others. I left names inside the box. Tell them." It was signed, Delgado. The clerk at Union Trust Bank looked up with a puzzled expression as Isaiah handed over the envelope. "Safe deposit access?" she asked, scanning the number. "Box 212. Isaiah nodded once, his voice dry. "My father left it in my name." The woman examined the decades-old documentation, paused to compare the signature, then disappeared behind a frosted glass wall. Moments later, she returned with a set of keys and gestured toward a private access room. "This way, please." Isaiah followed her past polished tile floors, past a hallway where the air was unnaturally still. She opened the steel vault door with 2 turns. and stepped aside. You have 20 minutes. The room was quiet, no cameras, no noise. Isaiah stepped forward, his hands suddenly heavy with generations of weight. He slid the key into the rusted lock of box 212 and opened it. What he saw was not what he expected. There were no mementos, no photos, no letters from a grieving man to his son. Instead, the box was filled with documents, files meticulously preserved in plastic, folders stamped confidential, and at the very bottom, a black journal with cracked leather binding. Isaiah's hands trembled slightly as he began pulling each item out. The first folder was labeled Operation Echo Depth, Unredacted Directives. He opened it slowly. His father had risked everything to preserve what the military had tried to burn. Inside were operational memos stamped with Pentagon seals, outlining the real mission behind Echo Depth. It had never been about contractor recovery. It had been a cleanup. The documents described a hidden biotechnical facility, located just outside Mandala, camouflaged under the guise of humanitarian aid. Run by private contractors, it was secretly backed by U.S. defense intelligence. The purpose? Extract test data from unauthorized field trials conducted on displaced civilians. Biological experimentation under wartime fog. Isaiah blinked in disbelief. His mission had not just been manipulated, it had been an accomplice to war crimes. Then he saw the signatures. General Eldrick Vance, Admiral June Talley. A third name caught him cold, Senator Horace M. Vellum, the man now chairing the Senate Armed Services Committee. His signature wasn't just present, it was initialed on the directive to sanitize all field-level interactions. It was there in red ink beneath the phrase, "If the Andala civilian assets are encountered by unauthorized units, remove all trace of interaction, collateral loss acceptable. Containment is critical." Isaiah recoiled as though the file burned his skin. Next he pulled out his father's journal. Each page was dense with entries, some in code, others in tight cursive. One entry stood out, written shortly after James Trenton returned from Vietnam. "They erased my unit's sacrifice so they could elevate the white captain. He got the stars. I got the silence. I've seen what they do with black soldiers, who break their narrative. But I've started collecting names. There's a sickness in this uniform. If I disappear, maybe someone else will finish the fight." Isaiah pressed his fingers to the words. It wasn't just a record. It was a confession. A burden passed like a torch. The final folder was marked DACY Departmental Encryption Containment of Yield. It was a classified program dedicated to falsifying commendation data for public record. Attached were 5 documented cases of valor stolen from black soldiers and reassigned. Isaiah's name was there. So were others. Delgado, 2 Marines from Afghanistan, a Navy corpsman from Somalia. Every name stripped, their recognition repurposed. He dropped the folder onto the table and leaned back in the chair, chest heaving. This wasn't just military injustice. This was political rot. And it was tied together with the same ink that wrote history textbooks and approved medals on C-SPAN. He reached for his phone. There was only one journalist left who had ever dared to take on the Pentagon and lived to tell it. He scrolled to the name Cassandra Vale. Years ago, she had exposed a drone cover-up in Yemen. It had cost her a career but earned her underground credibility and the trust of men like Isaiah's father. He pressed call. A few rings, then a click. Her voice came through, crisp, cautious. "This line is monitored. Speak carefully." "This is Isaiah Trenton," he said. "I have proof of systemic valor theft, a black ops cover-up, and a sitting senator's signature on orders that violated war protocols." A pause. "You're the one from the Echo Depth silence file," she said. He froze. "How do you know that?" "I've seen fragments," she said. "Whistleblowers pass through, but no one's ever had the whole picture. Not until now. I have everything. And I'm ready to go public." Another pause. This time longer. "Are you sure?" she asked. "They'll ruin your life before they let this see light?" "They already tried," Isaiah replied. "What I have, it's not just about me. My father. Others. Whole legacies erased so white uniforms could shine brighter." "Then meet me," she said. 1 hour. Bring everything. There's only one shot at this. As Isaiah ends the call and gathers the folders, his phone lights up with a new notification. A live news alert. Breaking. Senator Horace Vellum hospitalized in suspected poisoning. Sources say a confidential informant attempted to confront him inside his office. The informant is missing. Below the text and image. Grainy security footage. Isaiah leans in. The blurred face in the frame. Delgado. A lie. Isaiah's phone buzzed with relentless fury. As he stepped back into the safe house, arms full of files that now felt radioactive. The folders, proof of a decades-long betrayal, were secured, but the air around him felt heavier. Thin. Every notification lit the screen with warnings, like digital sirens screaming, "Don't trust anyone." The news of Senator Vellum's hospitalization had exploded across every outlet. Pundits speculated everything from an assassination attempt to a food allergy. No one mentioned the truth, that a man who had orchestrated erasure at a national level had just come face to face with one of his ghosts. But while Vellum trended as a victim, Isaiah's name followed as a villain. The headline on Channel 7's breaking banner was deliberate. Former Marine linked to deep state conspiracy targeting U.S. Senator. The segment showed a photo of Isaiah in uniform, doctored with shadow overlays to make his features look harder, colder. The reporter used words like unstable, radicalized, possible domestic threat. His voice was calm, but the subtext screamed, "He's dangerous. He's ungrateful. He's not one of us anymore." Isaiah sat on the edge of the cot, watching his former colleagues distance themselves in real time. Colonel Bledsoe, once tight-lipped, now cooperative, was quoted as saying, "Trenton was always intense. We had concerns during his last few deployments." Another Marine, whose life Isaiah had once saved, tweeted, "I don't know the man he's become. This isn't who we served with." The betrayal cut deeper than the media. Friends stopped answering. Emails bounced back. Two activist groups that once asked him to speak at veterans events now issued quiet retractions, citing pending legal investigations. A journalist he'd previously trusted posted a cryptic tweet, "Sometimes our heroes are too complicated to champion." Social media turned into a war zone. Troll accounts, some real, others clearly automated, began reshaping his life into a grotesque narrative. Photos from his deployment were leaked, and captioned with lies. "Here's Isaiah Trenton aiming at a child." It was a security sweep. No weapons were drawn. Trenton during a heated outburst at a VA center. It was a town hall, where he'd calmly challenged mistreatment of PTSD patients, known to have violent tendencies, cited from the same courthouse arrest now known to be unjust. He was losing control of his own identity. And that's when the calls began. Blocked numbers. Robotic voices. The first was vague. "You're making enemies, Sergeant." The second, colder. "Patriotism has consequences." The third, unmistakably human. "You should have stayed invisible." He tried tracing one of them through a VPN, but the signal rerouted endlessly through offshore proxies. Finally, he forwarded one number to a contact he still trusted from a digital security network. An old friend from basic training turned whistleblower. The message came back within minutes. "Isaiah, this number is registered to a sub-office within DHS. You're being watched from inside." He stood in the center of the safe house. Light flickering. Silence oppressive. This was beyond character defamation. It was systemic annihilation. And the irony, bitter and cruel, was that this machine of erasure had been honed long before him. Refined through the deaths of his father's brothers in Vietnam. Perfected during Desert Storm. Rehearsed in Somalia. It had never been designed to protect the country. It had been designed to protect the illusion of who the country wanted to be. And in that version, Isaiah was a threat. He couldn't go outside without risking arrest or worse. The walls of his temporary sanctuary began to feel like a padded cell. The documents on the table glared back at him, heavy with names, signatures, evidence. But all that truth had done was turn him into a national myth, rewritten in real time by fear and race and silence. He dialed Cassandra Vale again. "We need to move," he told her, voice low. "I'm working on a secure location," she replied. "Something offshore." "I'm not trying to run," Isaiah snapped. "I'm trying to be heard before they erase me completely." She exhaled. "You won't survive a press conference, Isaiah. They'll claim it's fake, or leak something darker. They'll use any scrap of your past, PTSD, your arrest, your father's record, to paint you as mentally unstable." Isaiah stared out the window. "They already have." Cassandra paused. "Then you only have one play left." "What's that?" "You stop playing defense." Isaiah sat back down. "You're saying go scorched earth. I'm saying make yourself undeniable. Show the footage. Read the orders. Publish your father's journal. Leak the faces. All of it. At once. Across every platform. If you wait for permission, you'll die invisible. He looked at the laptop. The drive was still plugged in. Dozens of files, images, scans, and statements. Enough to rewrite history, if it reached the right audience. Then came the twist. His phone vibrated again. This time, it was a text. One line. You have 48 hours to disappear, or we'll make you disappear. No ID, no name, just a traceable signal. He dropped the number into his tracing app and waited. The result popped up in red. Federal Communications Service Node, Alexandria, VA. Depth of Homeland Security, classified extension. Isaiah blinked. They weren't hiding anymore. They were making it personal. As he stared at the threat, another notification came through, an email from an address he didn't recognize. Subject: I can help you, but you'll have to burn the truth. Attached a video. A woman's face, shadowed, but unmistakable. It was a nanny, alive, speaking, and warning him. They're not after you because of what you did. They're after you because of what you didn't know you carried. Isaiah stared at the flickering image of a nanny on his laptop screen. Older now, her face lean, voice steady, recorded in a dark room lit only by the cold glow of a desk lamp. Her eyes, once wide with fear in the jungle village of Nindala, now bore the quiet armor of someone who had learned to survive lies bigger than nations. She spoke calmly, but each word stabbed with precision. They're not after you because of what you did. They're after you because of what you didn't know you carried. The video cut out abruptly, replaced by a series of coordinates embedded in the metadata. A location ping in North Carolina. A safe house? A trap? Isaiah couldn't know. But what he did know was this. If Anini was alive and reaching out, then the story wasn't over. It had just widened. Isaiah moved fast. The files were now being uploaded in staggered waves to hidden servers, set to release publicly if his signal dropped, or if his identity failed to verify every 24 hours. It was a fail-safe, but even that felt brittle. The system had never protected men like him. It had consumed them. Now it was time to build one of his own. He reached out to a network of Black veterans, men and women he'd crossed paths with during deployments, at VA town halls, in forgotten message boards, or in line at overburdened clinics. Many had their own stories, medals delayed, missions misattributed, commendations rewritten in the names of junior white officers. They had never organized before. Grief kept them isolated. Shame made them silent. But Isaiah's voice, and the evidence he carried, changed them. They called it the civilian uniform, a term coined by one of the Marines, an amputee named Reed, who said, "The second we take off our gear, we're no longer soldiers, we're suspects, ghosts. They don't see valor when we're not in camo." Isaiah nodded. "Then we wear the uniform they can't strip. Our story." They moved quietly, gathering testimonies, scanning discharge papers, pulling archival fragments from the basements of forgotten records. Some risked jobs to leak internal communications. Others retrieved physical letters from family attics, drafts of medals never awarded, citations never signed. A former Navy linguist named Jana revealed audio recordings of a debrief in which her commanding officer explicitly stated her commendation might cause unnecessary demographic optics. Translation? Isaiah asked. Jana didn't blink. They didn't want a black woman from Mississippi being the face of heroism in a region the U.S. wanted to pacify. The group held their meetings in rotating encrypted video calls, each member speaking from darkened rooms, garage workshops, or inside parked cars, with engines running. Their faces flickered, their voices cracked, but their words built something solid, a story bigger than any one betrayal. Isaiah became a reluctant leader. Not because he wanted to, but because every veteran who came forward looked at him like he was the first person to finally name what they had endured in silence. And in every testimony he heard echoes of his father. One night, after a session ended, Isaiah sat alone, rereading a letter from Delgado tucked into one of the safehouse folders. "The war don't end when you fly home. For us it just changes uniforms." That line sat like a weight on his chest. They weren't fighting insurgents now. They were fighting erasure, engineered invisibility, built into medals, policy, and memory itself. That week, they produced a sealed document, the Civilian Uniform Dossier, a 312-page archive of stories, files, and voices, each one a bulletproof fragment of stolen valor. It named names, tracked falsified citations, outlined an institutional pattern of race-based elevation in commendations. It included files from Operation Echo Depth, notes from James Trenton's Vietnam deployment, and redacted statements unredacted by insiders who finally had enough. Still, the question remained, where could they take it? The mainstream media had already dismissed Isaiah as unstable. Journalists were compromised or in hiding. Congressional hearings were performative, slow-moving machines designed to wear down even the most righteous causes. Then, an email came. Subject line, confidential invite. Select testimony request under classified panel. The sender was cryptic, a congressional aide, known only as TH. It included a secured passcode, a DC location, and a time Thursday 0400. Isaiah called Cassandra. This could be a trap, she warned, or it could be the only way forward. What's the difference? Isaiah asked. The difference, she said, is whether you walk in knowing which part of the story you're willing to die for. He didn't answer immediately, but deep inside he already knew. On the night before the hearing, Isaiah receives a package slid under his motel door. Inside is an encrypted USB drive with a single line engraved on the casing. Use this only, if they lie. Taped to the back is a note written in the same handwriting as his father's journal. But it's dated 2 weeks ago. I knew they'd never let you speak free. This is your insurance. You don't owe them silence. JT. The Capitol was silent at 3:47 a.m., not with peace but with anticipation, like a breath being held behind thick walls and steel doors. Isaiah stood outside the subcommittee chamber, holding the sealed dossier like a living thing. His suit was plain, slightly wrinkled, his eyes shadowed by sleepless nights, but his posture straight-backed and still, carried the weight of 3 generations of forgotten service. Behind him, 4 others waited in silence. Jana, the former Navy linguist, Reed, the Marine amputee, Sergeant Clark, a Gulf War veteran whose Bronze Star was issued posthumously to a white officer, and Lieutenant Audrey Sims, once the youngest black woman to lead a humanitarian patrol in Kosovo, now listed as auxiliary support in official archives. They had no armor now, just documents, memories, and a story America had always refused to hear unless a white man wore its title. The aide, known only as TH, emerged from the double doors, nodding. They're ready. 5 minutes. No cameras. No press. Phones off. Isaiah stepped forward. Any committee press secretary? Denied. National security override. Of course. The truth, when inconvenient, was always a threat to stability. As they entered, the room felt like a stage dressed in shadows. A half-circle of senators seated under the dull light of amber sconces, their names illuminated on brass plaques, each face carved in bureaucracy, emotionless, controlled, already playing defense. Senator Callum from Georgia, who led the session, motioned for them to sit. His voice was practiced. We are here today under a closed session protected by Section 17 of the Armed Services Oversight Mandate. This meeting is not recorded. Transcriptions are private. Disclosure of contents is punishable under federal law. Isaiah didn't blink. You're more afraid of what we'll say than what was done. Callum didn't respond. Another senator, Senator Leeds, a thin-lipped man from Idaho, cleared his throat. Mr. Trenton, we're prepared to listen to your claims. However, understand this. Our goal here is not to prosecute narratives. It's to assess verifiable evidence. Isaiah opened the dossier and placed 3 folders before the panel. Then let's verify. He started with the unredacted orders from Operation Echo Depth. His voice was calm, clipped, each word landing with surgical weight. He walked them through the rewritten commendations, the doctored records, and the false elevation of Lucas Payne. When he held up the page with Senator Vellum's signature, the directive authorizing civilian erasure, a visible shift occurred in the room. Callum adjusted in his chair. Senator Leeds averted his eyes. Jana followed with her audio evidence. A senior officer discussing optics and the need to prioritize palatable candidates for commendation distribution. The room stiffened as her clear voice played over the small speaker, repeating, "Let's not over-diversify our military PR. It confuses our base." Next came Audrey, reading from her deployment report, one that never made it into Pentagon archives. Her voice cracked as she recalled losing 5 team members while protecting civilians during a shelling in Eastern Europe, only to see her mission credited to a recently deployed male officer. "I was the only one left alive," she said. "And still I wasn't the story." Reed placed on the table a photograph of his ruined leg beside the email chain, denying his Medal of Valor, due to unfortunate chain of command complications. He leaned forward, eyes wet but unblinking. I bled for this country, he said, but apparently not in the right color. Silence thickened. When Isaiah spoke again, his voice was almost soft. This isn't just military injustice. This is deliberate burial, a system-wide suppression of black valor to protect the illusion that heroism wears one face. You haven't denied the truth. You've buried it. For decades. Senator Leeds responded first. These are difficult accusations, Mr. Trenton. But medals are subjective. Command decisions are nuanced. Records evolve. There's no proof this is racial. Isaiah held up the spreadsheet, the decoy program's demographic breakdown. Black nominees, 38. Commendations awarded 3. White nominees, 64. Awards granted. That's not evolution, he said. That's design. Another senator, an older woman from Nebraska, looked uneasy. You have to understand the risk of this becoming public. Confidence in the military could finally reflect reality. Jana cut in. Callum raised his hand. That's enough. Isaiah leaned forward. What you're really afraid of is losing control of the story. But you've already lost it. Because we've told it to each other. And now we're telling it to the world. Callum stared at him. Cold. There will be no press statement from this hearing. I didn't ask for permission, Isaiah replied. The senators fell silent again. But in the shadows, one face was different. Younger, eyes restless, fingers twitching beside a closed notepad. Senator Maren Givens, of Oregon, newly elected, mixed race. Barely 35. She hadn't spoken all session. As the others began shuffling papers and calling for adjournment, she reached into her coat and retrieved a tiny recording device. This doesn't leave the room, Senator Leeds warned sharply. Maren didn't flinch. That's the problem. Too many truths never left the room. Callum barked. Senator Givens, you're violating session protocol. She turned to Isaiah. I believe you. And if this committee won't move, I will. Before anyone could stop her, she stood, recording in hand, and walked out. No one followed. Because no one knew how to stop a truth that had already been spoken. Minutes later, as Isaiah and the others stepped out into the early morning light, their phones lit up in unison. A live video feed had just gone viral. Senator Maren Givens, standing on the Capitol steps, was reading Isaiah's testimony aloud, line by line, into the cameras. And behind her, someone held up a sign in the crowd. It read, "This time, we remember everyone." The footage broke the internet before dawn. Senator Maren Givens, standing alone on the steps of the Capitol in the muted light of early morning, reading Isaiah Trenton's testimony aloud to a stunned nation. Her voice, though steady, trembled at key moments, especially as she named names. The camera feed, picked up by a bystander's live stream, showed her eyes narrow with each sentence, her hands gripping the folded pages like gospel. Operation Echo Depth was a mission rewritten by the machinery of racial suppression, she said. Sergeant Isaiah Trenton acted with honor, risked his life to save civilians, and was erased to preserve a lie. And with that, the dam broke. Within an hour, the video had amassed over 1.2 million views. By noon, it was on every major network. News anchors scrambled to catch up, balancing legal caution with the fire of a story too big to contain. Screens split with archive photos of Isaiah in uniform beside clips of General Vance, Admiral Talley, and the late Senator Vellum, now whispered about as architects of a cover-up that spanned administrations. The hashtags were instant and sharp. Echo Depth Truth. On a race. Trenton did not lie. By nightfall, vigils had erupted in front of federal buildings. Black veterans, once scattered in quiet isolation, now marched shoulder to shoulder, holding signs etched with the names of soldiers whose medals had never arrived. Cities like Atlanta, Baltimore, and Chicago pulsed with chants not of vengeance but of visibility. Isaiah watched the world shift from a small motel room in D.C., the TV muted, the headlines rolling silently across the screen like validation finally catching up to pain. He sat on the edge of the bed, laptop open, notifications piling into his inbox faster than he could clear them. Interviews requested, panels assembled, support groups activated. But he wasn't celebrating. The truth had survived, but so had the fear. At the center of it all, beneath the noise and retweets and rapid statements of solidarity, lay a question Isaiah couldn't shake. One voice can shake an institution, but will it change it? The civilian uniform dossier had gone public with Maren's speech. Its files were hosted now on mirrored networks across 3 continents, translated into multiple languages, accessible through military whistleblower archives, and freedom of information repositories. Even The Atlantic released a special edition titled Valor and Vanishing: How the U.S. Military Shaped Its Heroes in Silence. But in the shadows, counterattacks brewed. Senator Leeds went on Fox to call the leak a tragic distortion of military history. General Vance issued a statement claiming operational misinformation had been weaponized by foreign agents. A defense analyst wrote a viral op-ed suggesting Isaiah's narrative was emotive but lacks proper context of chain-of-command complexities. It was the same tactic Isaiah had faced in the courtroom: challenge credibility, not content, deny nothing, but dilute everything. Still, cracks widened. An internal review at the Department of Defense confirmed the existence of the decoy program. Officials called it a legacy protocol no longer in use, but the damage was done. 4 commendations were officially revoked from white officers, whose actions had been falsely attributed. Their names, once praised in press releases, now trailed with an asterisk, citation in question pending reclassification. Meanwhile, medals that had sat unmailed in archive drawers were finally being engraved. Jana received her commendation for humanitarian bravery. Reed was issued his Medal of Valor posthumously to his former unit's record. Lieutenant Sims was contacted by NATO directly, her service re-evaluated under international review, and Isaiah, his Medal of Honor recommendation was reactivated, not through formality, but through public demand. A petition with over 4 million signatures flooded the Department of Veterans Affairs. But even with the mounting pressure, the system dragged its feet. Then came the unexpected shift. Judge Lorraine Whitmore, the same judge who denied Isaiah's right to a phone call, whose name appeared briefly in a few investigative threads for her habitual bias in veteran-related cases, was placed under federal review. The footage of her ruling was replayed across networks with side-by-side analyses of her conviction patterns by race. A deeper audit uncovered over 70 dismissed claims filed by veterans of color in her courtroom, some alleging PTSD, others wrongly accused in public disputes. Most were dismissed or buried in plea deals. The public response was immediate. A protest formed outside her courthouse, this time led by Black women, mothers, wives, sisters of soldiers who had come home to silence. Their signs read, "You denied him a call. We won't deny him justice." In a brief statement issued from chambers, Judge Whitmore said, "I acted within the law as I understood it. In hindsight, I see how perception shaped consequence. But perception wasn't the issue. Systemic dehumanization was. And now the scales were finally being measured." Cassandra Vail, in her return to primetime journalism, aired an exclusive exposé titled "The Erased Voices the Medals Forgot." It featured Isaiah's full testimony, intercut with testimonies from other veterans who had been previously silenced. The documentary opened with his father's journal, read aloud by Isaiah himself. "My father said, 'They gave me a flag, but not a face in history. I carried that weight, thinking it was mine alone. But it belonged to generations.'" The line went viral, played again and again in classrooms, on TikTok, at public lectures. Yet, beneath the national conversation, something darker festered. Isaiah's inbox still bore threats, now coded, more cryptic, messages like "change the story, or it will change you." Or a single line in Latin, "Nulla memoria sine sacrificio," no memory without sacrifice. He knew the war wasn't over. The story had gained traction, yes, but systems don't crumble from exposure. They just mutate, rebrand, wait. Still, in the fleeting window of truth, something was undeniably happening. Isaiah's name was being spoken not as scandal but as history reclaimed. Teachers reached out for classroom materials. Veterans groups reorganized under the name Civilian Uniform Coalition. Former military leaders, moved by guilt or clarity, began coming forward to offer corroboration. One of them, a retired admiral named Cliff Haven, appeared in a live segment and said plainly, "I served with Isaiah's father. I saw what they did to him, and I stayed silent. I won't do that again." Isaiah sat in his motel room, the volume low, the world loud. A storm was here, righteous and overdue. His phone buzzed once more. An email from an encrypted source. Subject, "Ray, your father's final request." Attached was a voice message. Isaiah played it. It was his father, James Trenton. Gravely. "Broken. Recorded long ago. Son, there's one more file. I left it with someone I trusted. If you're hearing this, it means you found the box. But what I couldn't write, it's in her hands. She's alive. And she's waiting. Then silence. And with it, coordinates pinged onto Isaiah's screen. A remote location in Alabama. The last truth still hidden. The sky over Arlington was gray but unthreatening. The kind of overcast that made marble headstones glow faintly in the morning light. Rows upon rows of silence marked sacrifice. But today, one grave stood surrounded by people who refused to let silence define it again. A color guard lined the path. A lone bugler stood just behind the podium, his trumpet lowered respectfully. Flags rippled gently in the wind. Cameramen stayed at a distance, their lenses aimed but quiet, capturing a moment the nation had waited far too long to acknowledge. In the center of it all stood a podium draped in black velvet, flanked by two engraved plaques. The first bore the name, Sergeant Isaiah Trenton, United States Marine Corps, 19 erased but never forgotten. The second, recently installed, bore the crest of the Medal of Honor. It had taken nearly a year since the viral hearing, the investigations, and the political fallout that followed. The Department of Defense, cornered by evidence too irrefutable to deny, and public pressure too loud to suppress, had finally issued the correction, not an apology, but a recognition. Isaiah Trenton had been awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest military distinction, for his actions during Operation Echo Depth. The citation now read, for gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, in defense not only of civilians but of a truth this nation long refused to face. But Isaiah wasn't here to receive it. 2 weeks after Senator Given's public reading of his testimony, Isaiah had disappeared. He had followed the coordinates from his father's final voice message to a remote cabin in Alabama, nestled in a hollow so deep GPS gave up trying. What happened there was never officially documented. Witnesses claimed to see helicopters days later. Others said federal cars rolled in and out at odd hours. When the news finally broke, the official story said he had succumbed to complications related to trauma and stress, a diplomatic phrase used to mean nothing and hide everything. Some believed it was an assassination. Others believed Isaiah had chosen exile to preserve what was left of his soul. Cassandra Vale hinted at knowing more, but she never spoke again. The only thing made public was his Medal of Honor ceremony, held posthumously, streamed live, attended by leaders from every military branch. President Mallory stood at the podium that day, flanked by generals who'd once signed denial letters. Sometimes, she said, voice unwavering, justice is late, but it must never be silent. Behind her, the American flag fluttered at half-mast, not only for Isaiah, but for every forgotten soldier who had lived his story in pieces. On that day, the president signed into law the Trenton Recognition Act, establishing Black Veterans Remembrance Day, to be observed annually on November 5th, the day Isaiah was first denied his call. Schools rewrote textbooks. The decoy program was officially dismantled. Several senators were forced into retirement. Others resigned quietly. Lucas Payne vanished from politics altogether, issuing one final statement. I was given what wasn't mine. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it. And across the country, stories began to surface. Families mailed in records. Forgotten medals arrived decades late. Graves long ignored received new plaques. The silence broke in waves, and the voices that emerged were tired, but no longer alone. At Arlington, Reed sat in a wheelchair beneath a white tent, holding a folded flag in his lap. Jana stood beside him, her navy dress uniform crisp, lips trembling. Sims, now a retired colonel, watched from the third row, sunglasses hiding her tears. Behind them stood hundreds of veterans, activists, teachers, students and strangers, all drawn not by obligation, but reverence. The ceremony ended quietly. No speech could do more than the silence Isaiah had shattered with truth. After the crowds dispersed, the cemetery returned to stillness, a stillness now transformed. But the story wasn't done. As the sun began to lower, a boy no older than 12 walked slowly up the path, escorted by an older woman in a faded Marine Corps jacket. His hair was neatly combed, his sneakers dusted with gravel. In his hand was a folded letter. He knelt by Isaiah's headstone, his eyes wide with something heavier than childhood. The woman stood a few steps behind, silent, letting him take the moment for himself. The boy ran his hand along the etched name. My daddy said you were the reason he didn't quit. He unfolded the letter. He wrote this for you. But he didn't get to send it. His fingers trembled as he placed it on the base of the headstone. I'm gonna wear the uniform too, he whispered. But I'm gonna tell the truth while I do. The woman stepped forward, placed a hand on his shoulder. Come on, baby. He turned one last time. His lips moved in a whisper, but the wind carried the words clearly. He made me believe again. As they walked away, a groundskeeper approached the grave to remove the letter for safekeeping. But something else caught his eye, something tucked just behind the stone. An envelope. Inside, a photograph, worn, creased, familiar. It was Isaiah. Not in uniform, not during a mission, but sitting on a porch in Alabama, alive, older, watching the sun set. And on the back, in Isaiah's own handwriting, legacy is only real if someone lives to carry it. If Isaiah Trenton's story moved you, if it made you think, made you feel, or reminded you of someone history tried to forget, then help us keep these voices alive. Subscribe to this channel for more powerful true stories like this one. Every like, every share, every comment is a step toward the justice that so many still wait for. Your engagement doesn't just support content, it amplifies truth. Let's make sure the next Isaiah isn't erased. Like, share, subscribe, because remembering isn't enough. We have to tell the story.